Okay, so today's lab will cover how to export a movie clip as an animated GIF for use for something like the web. So, how do we do that? And it's not easy. It's actually really confusing. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to create an animated GIF from a movie clip for use with the web. And the main settings that you think will work do not work. So I'm going to run through a couple of them, not all of them, because there's actually so many different ways you can export this as a GIF from Animate that don't work. I'm only going to run through a couple that don't, just to show you, and ones that you'd think are foolproof, and they definitely still don't work. So the first thing I'm going to try to do is go click on here. I'm going to go File, Export, Export Animated GIF. You'd think this would work just fine, right? A few things to keep in mind. This clip to stage, by default, your settings should look something like this. And what we're going to do is we can start to play around with some of these settings. In the long run, I'm going to tell you right now, this is not going to work, but I'm going to clip to stage. This allows me to have a smaller dimension set for, let's just say, for my website or whatever, and which is really nice, but our transparency still isn't coming out right. And the other thing that's not working right is the animation itself. And if you haven't already figured out why, it's because on our main stage here, this never plays anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and show you. Until you export it as a SWF, it works fine, right? So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to save it blue fire just to show you. I've tried this a couple times just to make sure and test it. And here, blue fire, this is what it turns out to be. And you see it has this strange transparency going around it. Also, it is clipped, but it's not animating, so that's not working at all. I'll show you another way we can try and export this. File, export, export movie, and in here I'm gonna have to delete these because I don't want any funny things happening with the numbering convention, just to show you. These are still not going to work, but just to demonstrate to you why this is so confusing for people, this is the reason why. So I'm going to go into my movie, and even if I go ahead and open this up, my transparency is still not working correctly, and it is not playing still. It could be possibly not pulling the other images from it, but if I go to the next one, they're all the same image. So just going through these images does not necessarily mean that it's going to work, because all these images are the same, just like they are here on this stage. They're not animating. Now the funny part is it does animate when you hit Control Enter and export as a SWF file. So how do we get this to export correctly? And you could try all the different image sequences up here. None of these will work. Not one in this file export or in the publish settings that I know of anyway. The way you can export this is clicking on your movie clip, right-clicking on the clip itself, and going to Export PNG Sequence. This is the only way it's going to work. I'm going to delete these. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and rename it. There we go. All this is good. It's basically clipping it for you already, because it's keeping the size basically of this blue bounding box, give or take. And I'm just going to keep all the rest of the settings the same and export. And it's exporting as smooth because the smooth was on there. So now, if I go into, I believe I put it in here, you'll notice if I open this up, it's going to be an image sequence. It's playing, it has a glow around it, it's working, so that's awesome, right? So now I have the image sequence in there. Now, if I want to export this as a GIF, I can do it a little bit easier now. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this one PNG Sequence Flame. And I'm going to actually delete this one now. I don't need it right now. So I'm going to File, Import, Import to Stage, and I'm going to import all of these blue flames, and I'm going to click Open. I just click the first one, shift click the last one, click Open. Or you could run a click and drag. Now this still doesn't help because they're all on the same layer and they're all in the same frame. So that does not help me at all. What I can do really easily, you'll see it has the glow around it, which is awesome. I'm going to highlight these. These are all going to be separate image files now. I'm going to highlight these all, right click, and I'm going to run a distribute to keyframes. And the first frame automatically becomes blank, and I want to just remove that one. By default, it just does that. So this loops properly, I want to make sure I remove that first blank keyframe. But now, each one of these frames has been changed, and each frame 1 through 7 is on their own keyframe, playing in sequential order, which is awesome. So I've got my flame, and now I'm ready to export. Now I can export it, File, Export, Export Animated GIF. Still run into the same problems with the transparency. Nothing too much that I can do about that. No matter how much I play with these settings in here, it slightly alters it. It doesn't do the greatest job. And you could try messing with all of these other settings, and you'll start to see some strange things happening. But if you want to keep that glow, the best way to do it from this particular setting is to export as an animated from an animated GIF from Adobe Animate, but knowing your correct background to begin with can certainly help the visual look of this much better if you're putting it on the web or something. So I'll go ahead and just do a preview, and I'll show you here in the preview. Before it wasn't playing, right? Now it is. So now we've got this blue flame playing, which is really great. It's actually pulling the background color in the preview here as it previews it for you. Oh, and it also, by the way, gives you all the information about it down here. It's a GIF, it gives its dimensions, the size, settings, and then the HTML code for it, which is awesome. So now what I can do is I can save this, and instead of having this one, I'll just save that one. And now what we're going to run into, though, you'll see here in a second, I have that strange transparency happening. So I want to fix that. And how I fix that is no way you can really fix it entirely from Adobe Animate. And in fact, it's actually pretty difficult. It's best to just have knowing your background beforehand, or whatever it is, to work your way around that. If there is a better way to do it, you have to use different software. So I want to show you, for your guys' lab, this is what I'm looking for, just the exported lab from Adobe Animate. That's just like this. So you export it as an image sequence, re-import the image sequence, distribute to keyframes, and then export again as an animated GIF, and that's what I'm looking for. Just upload the GIF file. So I can just double click on it, it'll open up in a web browser, and it'll play just fine. So just upload, up to this point, this file. Just upload this animated GIF file. I don't mind having the strange transparency happening. Now, the other thing I want to show you is how to do this from Photoshop. So you can do this from Photoshop. I've never done it from 2017, so I'll see if there's any new settings. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import or open give it a moment. And desktop. Lab 20. I'm going to import the image sequence, and I'm going to click on the first one, and I'm going to click right down here and do image sequence. So it's going to bring all of these in image sequence. My frame rate, I'm going to change to 24, and I'm going, because I animated it at 24 frames per second, and I'm going to press OK. And now I've got my file here. So in here, what I'm going to do is window, and I'm going to bring up my timeline, and you're going to see, I just wanted to show you, click the video icon to add a media track, drag clips to rearrange or combine them. So a lot of people don't know you can bring in video clips and stuff into Photoshop, but you can. I'm going to go ahead and play it, and you'll see that I've got it playing. Now, from this point, what I want to do is I want to export this as my animation. And this should help on the transparency. Photoshop does a slightly better job of the transparent information around our GIF in this case. So I'm going to do a file, export, and I'm going to do save for web. And it's got all this information here, and let's go ahead and start messing around with these. And that looks a little bit better than from, I'm going with the diffusion algorithm here, and I'm going to have my transparency on. Go to diffusion, and you can mess around with all these settings and see how it works best. Oh, let me turn on my transparency there. And you can try to mess around with these and see what happens as far as the transparency information. What I can tell you is that the more you mess around with it, the better results you can get, but it's only going to be so good up to a certain point for animated GIFs for the web. So I put interlaced on. I think that might be about the best I'm getting as far as the transparency of the glow around it. And I'm showing you how to do this because this is probably the most difficult type of GIF to get correct. So if you can export one of these, you're going to be able to export any GIF you want. So I'm going to go ahead and do a save. Oh, I'll run a preview first. And it only played once, so go back here. Oh, I didn't show you that. It only played once because I have my web browser over here open. It's not going to. I'm going to do looping forever. There we go. And let's run one more preview. And this did a much better job than I personally think than the animated GIF from Adobe Animate. With the one from Adobe Animate with that dither algorithm, it was bringing up all these little dark speckles. It was pulling the information from the background, and where this one is not as much. And you can see the glow around it. It's a little bit better. Let's run a save. And from here, from Photoshop, I can go ahead and get a slightly better quality for the web. It still slightly has some of the transparency, but it's still transparency issues. You have to look close at it, at least I do. I find it to be much, much better than the one from Adobe Animate, and that's probably the best quality you're going to get. If you mess around with the settings a little bit more, you might be able to get it just right, but for this purpose, this is just totally fine and acceptable. This works great. I don't mind if you don't go through the Photoshop export process. I just wanted to show you guys in case it was really bothering some people. It really bothers them. They want to make sure they have their glow on something because it's flame, or if you're doing a galaxy where you have the sun in the middle or some type of animation like that, you want to make sure that you have some of these cool filters on there that make it look really nice but can be difficult to export correctly. So this is the best way I can come up with that exports extremely well and keeps the information on there, the transparency information, as clean as possible versus the other version from Adobe Animate. So Adobe Animate does a great job exporting GIFs without filters, but as movie clips, this is the best you're going to get that I know of anyway. After Effects can probably do something slightly a little bit cleaner, but for simplistic reasons, this isn't simple at all. Actually, this is a pretty difficult process, but this is the best way you can get this to work right using just Adobe Animate and Photoshop, because a lot of you guys are probably familiar with Photoshop. If not, no big deal. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this lab. The only requirement is the export from Adobe Animate. If you want to go ahead and mess around and try to export from Photoshop, you're more than welcome to. I just wanted to show you guys for those who wanted to try and explore a different way to do it. And that's about it. So that's how you export a movie clip GIF from Adobe Animate. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this lab. It's a little bit confusing, but if you have any questions, be sure to shoot me a message. Okay, have fun.